With the Resident Evil 4 remake dropping soon, okay, the video took longer than expected. Just watch it. And with it being one of the most popular horror series out there, I thought it was a great time to start my journey and see if these remakes are actually good at revamping these older titles for a fresh player of the franchise.
Resident Evil 0.
So I decided to start off the series by playing it chronologically, so Resident Evil 0 was up first. This is actually a prequel to the original Resident Evil, but this game didn't come out until 6 years and 8 games later. This story starts off with Rebecca Chambers and her special task force that she's a part of called STARS. The mission of this STARS team is to look for an escaped prisoner that's apparently murdered 23 people. Once they find the abandoned car that the prisoner escaped from, their investigation leads to a nearby train that seems like it's having its own troubles. And this is where we get thrown in the game, and man is it an entrance. Oh, okay, bet, I don't know how to fire. Okay. Now this is some old school gaming right here. This game immediately throws you in and doesn't tell you a single control. I mean, that's pretty standard of the games back in the day. And you're right, random viewer. That's how they'd upsell you on a $20 guide back in the day that you'd probably lose the next day. But once you actually go into the settings and you change the controls, you're actually good to go. But let me tell you, this game does not hold your hand whatsoever. The best strategy I found was to run into all the walls and just spam the A button, because otherwise you might miss key items that you need to advance, or possibly even whole other areas. It's very easy to believe that you explored every crack and corner of the room, but this game will have you missing whole portions just because of the camera angles. Which is wild, because usually in games, you're usually fighting against the camera angle, but this time, they just don't let you move it. But I get it, they try to use it in a way that's supposed to increase the horror and the jump scare potential of the game, but 8 times out of 10, all it does is just make you miss items, enemies, and the will to play the game, honestly. There's plenty of times when I'm trying to fight an enemy, but he's stuck in between camera angles to where I can't even tell if I'm hitting them or not. I really wouldn't be upset with it, because really all you have to do is either be patient and wait, or just keep shooting and hoping your bullets actually hit. But this game is a little bit different from the other Evils, because they like to jump you in this game. From zombies to spiders to monkeys and many more, they make you run the gauntlet. You'll see this in later games, but the only time you're surrounded is a situation where you can either fight or you just play and run away. But Resident Evil gives you enemies that can either shoot you from afar or outspeed you no matter how far away you are, and attempt to waste ammo or just straight up die because you don't know where you're going. And this is a loop that can just straight up kill the fun of the game and possibly make you reload an old save because you don't have the resources to progress any further in the game. This game will suck you dry of time. If you're an inexperienced RE player like me, it could take you a while to navigate through all this. Just between the first 2 sections of the game, there's already like a difficulty jump between them. You start off with a fairly linear train segment running back and forth through train cars, but after that segment, you open up to a free roam mansion section. And let me tell you, this mansion isn't easy because it's pretty much Mickey Mouse's clubhouse in disguise. If you don't got the right mouse tool, you ain't getting nowhere in this house. An example would be to open just a 1 drawer in this desk. You gotta play this giant chess game and move the pieces to the right spot. Otherwise, you just get hit with poison gas. It's always been a staple in the series to have some sort of inventory system, but they decided to change it for this specific game. Now, you each get 6 item slots per character, so 12 item slots in total you got access to because of the partner system, but we're going to talk more on that later. What makes this different from other Resident Evil games is those games have an item box, and that item box is just a simple box where you can store and take out items from wherever you at as long as you're in a safe room. That way you can collect and store items and don't have to really worry about inventory management all that much. So with no item boxes in RE0, the only thing they'll allow you to do is to drop the items. But unlike other REs where the item box follows you to whatever safe room you're in, the items you drop in RE0 You kind of just have to go back and backtrack every single time to pick up those items again if needed. And normally that wouldn't be a problem. You just gotta remember where you dropped items and just be vigilant on picking them up when you need it. But Resident Evil isn't your typical shooter type game. This is a game of endurance and conservation. So now you have to conserve ammo, run past enemies, figure out puzzles, and if you have a piece that you might need to go back and get, you have to run back through those same enemies again. And this game is already pretty stingy when it comes to health items, so you have to be doubly sure that you're careful not to get hit again. Add on to actually save in this game, you need an item to do so. And to top it all off, you need to worry about 2 health bars of 2 separate people because of the partner system. Don't get me wrong, the partner system idea is cool, but I don't think it works with the game mechanics. It's like you're building a house on sand. Eventually the tide is gonna come in. So this system allows you to control and switch back and forth between the main characters. It gives characters both their own attributes. For example, Billy can take more hits than Rebecca, but Rebecca is the only one that can mix the healing items to make stronger ones. You can split them up or have them follow each other because some of the puzzles do require both of them to complete. On paper, sounds like a great idea. On the flip side, it just makes the game so much harder because now you have to worry about 2 things instead of 1 in a zombie infested mansion. Even if you go solo with 1 character, there's still the possibility they can get attacked and need saving, and so you'd have to switch to the other character no matter how dire the situation is. Not to mention the headache of finding an area where you need both of them with enemies nearby. The game doesn't seem to really double the healing items to help out. You just kinda gotta plan for the unknown and get ready to play the same part repeatedly. Replaying the older games nowadays really does test my patience because it's a different type of hard. Compared to like Elden Ring, if you die in that game, it's usually due to pure lack of skill and knowledge. Older games, it could be a myriad of things like unresponsive controls, weird hitboxes, depth perception, the list can go on, and Resident Evil is guilty to a lot of these gripes. Now I know I've been dogging on this game for pretty much this whole time, but I just want to touch back on it. I did enjoy the partner system. Just until I didn't. It's a unique concept, especially back then. I would even say today, very few games implement this. And if they do, it's probably just a co-op game just to begin with. Lastly, I did enjoy some of the puzzles in this game. To me, they had a top tier puzzle in there where it actually put you under pressure and just made you use some basic skills like math, and they just kept it pushing. They didn't drag anything out. If the game could have kept that kind of pace, I don't think I would have minded all the backtracking that they had throughout the game. I see the vision. This should be an 8 or a 9, but with some of the ideas present, most of the times they just fall flat and they just don't really work well together. And also because I didn't have the patience to finish this repetitiveness, this game gets a 6.5 out of 10 from me.
Resident Evil.
Next up is the game that started it all, Resident Evil. With the original game coming out in 1996 on the PlayStation, this remaster set out to revive it on the GameCube. Then it was given an HD remaster in 2015. At that point, they should have just gave it a remake. Going into this game, I was actually surprised. I couldn't really explain it, but for some reason this game felt way more polished compared to Resident Evil 0. Kind of crazy to think about because the original Resident Evil 0 came out only 8 months after on GameCube. The PC version I'm actually playing came out in 2016. So let's get into it. Since this one's the predecessor to 0, it has all the same problems like camera angles, easy to miss items, backtracking, yada yada. Which you could argue is just the foundation for RE games, but it's still bad game design, intentional or not. Although the aiming in this one just feels overall better. It feels like bullets actually connect and you can actually shoot in the direction you're aiming in. I want to give 0 the benefit of the doubt, but even with the updated controls for the PC version, this one still beats out 0 even though 0 came out later. Now that I've given Resident Evil some praise, I think it's time to really tear into the meat of this game. In this game, you can play as 2 separate characters, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine. For the sake of trying to get this video out before Resident Evil 4 drops, I decided to only play Chris's story. Spoiler, he didn't make it in time. If you're one of the only 2 people that hasn't played Resident Evil, to give you some context to the story, you're part of STARS. Yeah, you remember them? You're part of the Alpha team, which has been sent in search of Bravo Team, aka Rebecca's team from Resident Evil 0. When arriving at your destination, your squad gets attacked by dogs and mostly gets split up. Now finding the mansion, you must investigate and search for clues to the missing task force. With the story laid out, it starts off pretty decent. Now, if you're like me, you're never going to play this game as intended, and since I only played half of the story, it kind of got confusing, and most of the story was not on Chris's side of the playthrough. From what I've read, it seems Jill's story is more canon in the first half of the game, while the later half of the game, Chris's story is more canon. And anything else like the lore and world building are just told through notes like any other scary game usually does. But I gotta say, most of the cutscenes in Chris's story are useless. They're short little moments that probably would have worked off better as a text box on a screen. You got anything to say for yourself?
Oh, thank God I made it in time.
Not to mention that the scenes that are story-driven moments are all pretty much packed within the last hour of the game because of Chris's story. So when I originally beat the game, I was left confused and drained as I had just played through 12 hours of gameplay for a pinch of story. And when I looked up the lore afterwards, it still wasn't enough to spur me on to do a run back through Jill's playthroughs. And that's mostly because of the gameplay. I did enjoy the combat. This game doesn't dogpile enemies on you, so you're never really surrounded or stuck in like a save loop. They also give you the ability to use daggers and grenades, which is a newer feature, so if you're pinned down or grabbed, you can actually escape and not take a local beating. Combine that with the interesting enemy types, and you got a pretty good formula. Once you get a feel for the game, you can actually have fun with it, and the gameplay also still provides you with a challenge. I gotta say, the puzzles sometimes seem like they have little to no context to them, but I might just be dumb. But it still can be frustrating because that's why I always had to have a guide on hand to help me out. Finally, the game ties in well with the level design. Each section of the game feels different from the last one. One minute you're in a desolate mansion, and the next minute you're in a mysterious laboratory. Even when faced with similar places like the mansion and the residence section in the game, it still knows how to carry a distinguished air to both of them to where they don't feel the same. I had a fun playthrough with this one, even with its flaws. You lucky they didn't invent crouching in 1998. I would have teabagged you so quick. Oh, I totally forgot about her. Starting off the series strong, I can probably give this game an 8 out of 10.
Resident Evil 2.
Moving away from the remasters and finally hopping into the remakes, we're popping it off with Resident Evil 2. Off the bat, I kind of want to deduct points for taking away the title screen announcer, but that's just a nitpick. What I can say is these remakes are just superior. They've now made it in the style of all third-person shooters that have come out in the last decade, and they still manage to keep the creepy atmosphere. Capcom just put their foot in these games. Now, since I've never played the original of these games, a lot of my points aren't going to be necessarily relating to the game, but the franchise as a whole. Starting with how I love now that they moved away from telling plot points or major background details through these notes. Because I know reading's scary for most of y'all watching, but this style just breaks immersion. So it's very much appreciated that now all the cutscenes tell the story now, or at the bare minimum, the zombies are polite enough to let me read before dogpiling on me. And man, do they dogpile. Another slight change I noticed is that the developers don't just spawn in random zombies anymore, or at least it's not as frequent. So no more killing zombies in a hallway just to run back through later and zombies are busting through the windows. This time you'll get a warning by hearing them bang on windows and doors now. I would say the only exception are special infected like lickers, dogs, or the big man himself, Mr. X. Just to touch on it a little bit, Mr. X is a special zombie type called a tyrant, and they can't be killed, and at certain points of the game, he actually is constantly on the hunt for you. It's a great addition to the game because it adds a certain level of fear and anxiety, especially when you hear this. Once you hear his big feet or you actually see him, you just know to be on high alert and make sure you're out of there as soon as possible. Overall, he's just a great antagonist to the game that will stop at nothing to destroy any evidence or survivors of this pandemic. Next up, you can't have some good without some of the bad. The first con I'm giving to this game is the walking speed of the characters. I understand it's a staple of RE to have characters run at a light jog to add some intensity to it, but it's stupid because in no way is somebody in a zombie apocalypse gonna go for a brisk stroll when trying to escape a building. I just wish there was some form of a sprint button, even if the sprint lasted like 2 seconds. Second on the list of complaints is the level design. It's one thing to reference and draw from the first installment, but I couldn't help but notice that the Raccoon City Police Department is still very similar to the original mansion. From the main room layout to even some of the safe room locations. It just seems kind of lazy not to want to give us a whole new blueprint from scratch, especially when you made it a point to destroy the mansion at the end of the first Resident Evil. Even if you say I'm way off the mark on this one, it's hard to excuse the same events occurring in the first also happening in the second game. Side note, I actually played Leon's story when Resident Evil 2 first came out, but I actually don't have that footage anymore. So for this video, I gave Claire's playthrough the spotlight, so I'm going to be comparing the two Redfield siblings for the example, just to show the similarities. We start off with the Redfield that's gotten separated from their agreed upon teammate that they're now tasked with having to investigate and try to escape this huge mansion-esque place. While doing so, they have to collect these objects that lead them into a hidden section or walled off section of a previous area where they have to fight a boss monster. After surviving and exploring, this new area leads them to a residential area for one reason or another. Once finding the residence, they see a secret passage that ironically both have something to do with the boss monster. And after defeating that monster, eventually both of these rampaging Redfields follow a path underground and ultimately find the final areas of the game, which happen to be a facility. So when I tell you I played these games back to back and I caught a sense of deja vu more than once, I just felt the chance was kind of wasted given that you could do so much more with these characters, like Leon, who's a rookie cop whose first day on the force is actually his last, or Claire, who's out here searching for her missing brother and now has to turn up the heat and fight all these zombies. Like, come on, she's just as dope as him, but you give them the same plot only to change, what, a chromosome? The written story had me disappointed a little, but I still had a great time, especially looking at the updated graphics, having a nice horror ambiance still. Even the points that were rage-inducing, it still gives you a sense of hard work and just barely making it out alive. I can say this is my favorite one on the list, so I'll give this game an 8.5 out of 10.
Resident Evil 3.
Finally, we caught up to the latest release. In all honesty, I don't have a lot to say about this one. This remake's actually quite different from the other ones we talked about. Comparing this to RE2, each game has their own strengths and weaknesses. One of the biggest changes for RE3 is going to be the singular storyline versus the two separate campaigns we've been seeing up until now. And I think this is a needed change. This game shines better when you have one continuous flowing story. Nothing is lost either because you still get to play as two characters, and it takes out the need to hop around from story to story trying to connect the pieces. In Resident Evil 3, this time you're taking control of Jill Valentine again and her unlikely friend Carlos Oliveira, who works for Umbrella. The devs made character swapping pretty easy, it seems, because usually how they switch between the two is when one character is knocked out, the other character is there to help. Pretty simple solution. Without having to replay major sections, the game can actually tell a concise story, even if it is a shorter one, that ends in a lab level again. You finally get to see the story in a movie-like fashion, even if the main thing it sacrifices is replayability. With no other second storyline to play through, there's not much else to see once you complete the game, unless you like collectibles. Or maybe you're a little on the freaky side and just want to be chased by a big, brolic black nemesis. Just like Mr. X, there's a new tyrant-type zombie, and it's a great evolution from the previous generation. When coming off Resident Evil 2, you kind of get used to Mr. X and his slow walking pace, to the point where you know how to dodge him pretty well. Nemesis, on the other hand, ends up being a more athletic version of Mr. X. And the game devs make sure to let you know when Nemesis is around. Even when you get an audio warning, it still sends a chill knowing that the music changed and you know he can reach you at a moment's notice. This big fella can run at you, chase you down, lasso you, cut you off, transform the infected, you name it, he's got it. If that wasn't already unfair, they also give this man weapons and attachments. Nemesis is what I imagine would happen if crackheads got injected with the virus. So you might be wondering, what are your options against a monster like this? Well, it's either die... Oh my gosh! What was I supposed to do? He literally 3-piece comboed me. What? Or try the newest feature, Quick Step. Ooh. Ooh. I'm cold with this one. To give you more options to escape, they came up with the Quick Step to flee an incoming grab. I'm not the biggest fan of this mechanic because it's not really forgiving whatsoever and very easy to mess up. Let alone, the game never really teaches you how to use the move. They just drop the knowledge on you and then you just dip. When I said it was easy to mess up earlier, it's because if you don't dodge at the exact right moment, you might be in a more messed up situation than your original one. Too late and you get grabbed. Too early and now you're stuck in this weird moving animation that you can't escape from. Once you do get it right, it can feel pretty rewarding. Like when you play as Jill, you roll out of a situation and you can escape in a pretty tactical manner. With Carlos, it's more about force and power, and once you do hit it, you just lay them out. Once again, in my gameplay, I kind of just spam the button and hope for the best. Most of the time it doesn't work, but when it does, you can get some pretty cool moments out of it. I can clearly see why they added this feature, because the zombie count in this game can go pretty high. I can't tell if it's actually the zombies that have increased, or maybe the level design got smaller. Even if they did increase the zombie count, I still had somewhat fun with the game, and I can't say it's bad in the slightest, so I'll give this a 7 out of 10. Oh man, I don't know when this game came out. You lucky they haven't been crouching in 2021. Ooh. In conclusion, after playing all the remasters and remakes, I can say there's a ton of potential here. This is a franchise that's not afraid to try something new, but also knows when something does or doesn't work. And you can see this where some games shine while other games might feel like rush jobs. I feel like it might be hard to please some fans who are nostalgic of the series when Resident Evil 4 drops, just for the fact of it's regarded as one of the best games in the series. But after playing the Chainsaw demo that dropped last week, I can say without a doubt that there's some good moments in there. Oh, crouch. Oh, they got a crouch button. I told you it's time. It's time. Finally in 2023 we can crouch. It's time to teabag, man. But they shouldn't get careless and try to remix the remake.